You've been told that your future is something you move towards slowly, that you need more time, more progress, more steps before you can become the version of yourself you imagine. But the truth is simpler. You don't need time to become that version of you. The life you want isn't waiting years ahead. It's available right now, in the present moment, as a different state of being. The distance you feel isn't a distance in time. It's a distance in identity. The moment you shift who you're being, the future you thought you had to work toward becomes the present you can step into. Change doesn't wait for the calendar. It waits for alignment. You've already experienced moments where everything changed quickly, times when clarity arrived in an instant, or a decision altered the direction of your life without warning. Those moments weren't rare. They were examples of how fast reality updates when your internal state shifts. The speed wasn't the exception. The slowness is the illusion. The version of you living your dream life isn't a fantasy or a projection. It's a real, accessible configuration of your consciousness. A parallel expression of you that becomes available the moment your state matches it. Tuning into that version doesn't require effort, force, or time. It requires coherence. Stepping into the mindset, the emotional tone, and the internal posture of someone who no longer postpones who they are. The idea that growth must take time is a learned belief, not a universal truth. Once that belief loosens, a different kind of momentum appears. Not the slow climb you've been conditioned to expect, but an immediate shift in orientation. A sense that the future isn't ahead of you, it's right beside you, waiting for recognition. You don't need more time to reach the future you. You need a different state of being in the present. The moment that state changes, the timeline changes with it. The moment identity upgrades, reality reorganizes. And the moment you stop assuming you must earn your way into who you want to become, you give that version of yourself permission to exist now. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel if this message resonated with you, so you can get more valuable, high vibrational insights. You've been conditioned to believe that waiting is wise, that more clarity will come later, that the right moment will eventually arrive, that hesitation is a form of preparation. But waiting is almost never about readiness. It's about doubt. It's about rehearsing old identities instead of stepping into new ones. And the longer waiting continues, the more convincing the story becomes that progress must be slow, deliberate, and earned through time. The truth is that most people aren't waiting for timing. They're waiting for permission. They're waiting for the feeling of certainty to appear before they act, unaware that certainty is the result of action, not the precondition for it. When you pause your life until you feel ready, you're reinforcing the version of yourself that believes change is fragile and easily lost. You're strengthening the identity that thinks outcomes must be guaranteed before movement can happen. Hesitation creates the illusion of safety, but it also creates the illusion of distance. Every moment spent overthinking reinforces the idea that the life you want is further away than it is. Self-doubt adds weight to what would otherwise be a simple step. Over-planning makes the path feel complex. None of this is real. The only thing that grows when you wait is the belief that waiting is necessary. Progress doesn't require time. It requires alignment. And alignment is available in the moment you decide to stop negotiating with yourself. Most of the progress you imagine taking months or years could begin with a single, clear action. But hesitation interrupts that momentum before it can start. It convinces you that thinking longer will create a better outcome, when in reality, thinking longer only strengthens the identity that doesn't move. Over-planning creates the illusion of control. It feels productive, responsible, even smart. But planning without movement is just rehearsing fear in a socially acceptable form. The mind pretends it's protecting you from mistakes, but what it's really doing is protecting the current version of you from dissolving. Because once movement begins, the old identity no longer has a stable place to stand. The illusion of waiting dissolves the moment you realize the path isn't created by distance. It's created by decision. The experiences you want aren't locked behind time. They're locked behind identity. When you shift who you're being, the next step becomes obvious. Not because you waited for it, but because you became the person who can see it. There is nothing out there that needs to change before you act. The conditions you think you need are usually the conditions that appear only after you've moved. That's why the moment you stop postponing who you are, you feel a surge of clarity. It's not a reward. It's the natural response of stepping out of hesitation and into alignment. Waiting has never been your barrier. Waiting has only been a habit. And once you see through the habit, the idea of postponing your life begins to feel unfamiliar, almost unnatural. What was once hesitation becomes momentum. What was once delay becomes directness, and what once felt distant becomes accessible now. Every moment of your life is shaped by the frequency you're broadcasting. Not in an abstract or mystical sense, but in a practical way. Your emotional tone, your core beliefs, your physical posture, and the way you interpret what happens around you, all combine into a single state. That state functions like a tuning mechanism. It determines which version of reality you meet next. Frequency is not just emotion. Emotion is only one part of it. Frequency is the full pattern of how you're being. It's the combination of the stories you tell yourself, the expectations you carry into each moment, the meaning you assign to events, and the way your body organizes itself in response to those meanings. When these elements shift together, even slightly, the reality you perceive shifts with them. You felt this before. Think of a moment when you were calm, grounded and open. In that state, conversations felt easier. Opportunities seemed closer. Solutions came faster. It wasn't luck, It was alignment. Your frequency made you perceptive to certain possibilities that wouldn't have registered in a different state. The external world didn't change. The version of you interacting with it did. Now, think of moments when your frequency collapsed into fear, frustration, or resistance. Suddenly your options looked narrow. Your thinking became rigid. The same situation felt heavier, harder, more complex. Again, the external world didn't fundamentally shift. Your internal state tuned you into a version of reality where everything felt constrained. This is the mechanism most people overlook. You interpret reality through the emotional and physiological lens you're currently in. And that interpretation determines the path you see. Frequency shapes perception, and perception shapes possibility. When your frequency rises, your field of possibility expands. When your frequency drops, your world contracts. This is why two people can face the same situation and experience completely different outcomes. It's not their circumstances that differ. It's the frequency each person brings to those circumstances. Beliefs play a central role here. They form the baseline frequency that your emotions and posture respond to. If you believe life is against you, your frequency aligns with defensiveness, caution, and contraction. If you believe you are capable and supported, your frequency aligns with openness, curiosity, and movement. These aren't just mindsets. They are vibrational conditions that change the version of reality you match. Your posture reflects this just as much as your emotions do. A body that is tense, collapsed, or guarded broadcasts a different frequency than a body that is stable and relaxed. Even subtle shifts, lifting your chest, softening your shoulders, breathing more evenly, signal a different internal state. That physical shift influences your perception and therefore the reality you step into next. When all of these elements align, emotion, belief, posture, interpretation, you enter a frequency that naturally leads you into a different version of reality. You're not forcing change, you're tuning into it. This is why frequency is the true engine of transformation. It determines the opportunities you notice, the decisions you make, and the timelines you access. And the moment your frequency shifts, the reality that meets you shifts too. You can want something deeply and still never experience it. Wanting has almost no power on its own. Desire can point your attention toward a direction, but it can't shift the version of reality you meet. What actually shapes your reality is who you are being right now. Not the goals you've set, not the affirmations you repeat, not the outcomes you hope for. Your identity is the broadcast field that reality responds to. And everything in your life reflects the signal of that identity. Identity isn't the story you tell yourself verbally. It's the underlying definition you hold about who you are. It's the quiet assumption behind your decisions. It's the emotional signature that stays with you, even when your mind is trying to think positive. If you see yourself as someone who is always struggling, always behind, always trying to catch up, your reality aligns with that version of you, no matter how much you want things to change. The external world matches the internal definition, not the external desire. This explains why people can set ambitious goals, but still end up repeating familiar patterns. They're holding the identity of the old version of themselves while trying to access the life of a new version. It creates friction. It creates delay. And it creates the feeling that life is resisting you, when in reality, the identity you're broadcasting is simply incompatible with the reality you keep asking for. Identity acts like a tuning frequency. The world you perceive, the people you meet, the opportunities you notice, and the choices you make, all conform to the identity you embody. When your identity shifts, your reality has to shift with it. The mind often wants it the other way around. It wants proof before committing. It wants external change before internal alignment. But reality mirrors identity, not the reverse. Think about the times you've changed something about your life quickly. Maybe you adopted a new habit, left a situation that wasn't aligned, or made a decision that seemed long overdue. Those moments happened fast because your identity shifted first. You saw yourself differently, and the world reorganized accordingly. Once the identity changed, the choices became obvious. The new timeline became available, and the external world simply followed the internal lead. This is why focusing on wanting more doesn't work. Wanting more often reinforces the identity of someone who does not have. The frequency of desire is different from the frequency of embodiment. You can want abundance while carrying the identity of someone who lacks. You can want confidence while carrying the identity of someone who doubts. And reality reflects the identity, not the want. When you begin to embody the identity of the version of yourself who already lives the life you're aiming for, the shift happens quickly. You start to think differently, feel differently, choose differently. You begin to behave in ways that match the reality you've been trying to reach. And because identity sets the frequency, and frequency selects the timeline, your environment adjusts to match the new broadcast. You don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. And when you allow your identity to update, the reality that matches it appears without force. If you know someone who needs to remember this last part, share this video with them. Let's all raise our vibrations together. Most people believe they're guided by conscious thought, but the truth is that unconscious definitions are running far more of your life than you realize. These definitions sit beneath your thinking, shaping the meaning you assign to situations and the emotional states that follow. They influence how you interpret events, how you respond to opportunity, and how you navigate uncertainty. And because emotional state determines which timeline becomes available, these definitions quietly decide the direction of your entire life. A definition is simply the meaning you've attached to something. Yourself, the world, your past, your potential. It doesn't need to be spoken or even fully conscious. It operates in the background, directing your perception automatically. If your hidden definition is that life is unpredictable or unsafe, Your emotional state will reflect that, and you'll align with timelines where that belief appears to be true. If your definition is that you're capable and supported, your emotional state softens, expands, and aligns with realities that confirm that perspective. These definitions are often inherited. They come from childhood experiences, cultural conditioning, past relationships, and repeated emotional patterns. Over time, the mind stops questioning them. They become the default lens through which you interpret everything. This makes the definitions feel like objective truth, even though they're simply interpretations you've been carrying for years. When an unconscious definition is limiting, it generates emotions like hesitation, contraction, or anxiety. These emotions aren't random. They're the body's response to a meaning you may not even be aware you hold. And because emotional state acts as a tuning mechanism, these definitions pull you into timelines that match them. This is why change can feel difficult when the underlying definition remains untouched. You're trying to shift your life while holding the same meaning that created your current experience. You've seen this dynamic in action. You may have tried to approach something with confidence, but found yourself shrinking back. You may have planned to take a risk, but felt an invisible resistance. You may have wanted to open up or express yourself, but felt tension rise in your chest. In each of these cases, the resistance wasn't caused by the situation. It was caused by a definition you hadn't examined. The body reacts to the meaning before the mind understands it. When you become aware of a definition, you gain the ability to change it. And when the definition shifts, the emotional state shifts with it. Your posture changes, your interpretation changes, and a different timeline becomes available. The world you meet begins to reflect the updated meaning instead of the old one. This is why recognizing your hidden definitions matters so much. They determine the emotional frequency you live in. They shape your sense of possibility, and they filter the version of reality that becomes accessible to you. Once a limiting definition dissolves, the contraction it created dissolves with it. Alignment becomes easier, movement becomes natural, and the timelines that match your true self begin to appear clearly, without the interference of meanings that were never yours to begin with. Synchronicities aren't signs that something is about to happen. They're signs that something already shifted within you. They are immediate reflections of the frequency you're broadcasting in this moment. Most people interpret synchronicity as a cause, an event that creates meaning or predicts a future outcome. But synchronicities don't initiate anything. They reveal. They are the mirror of your internal state, appearing in physical form. Reality responds to your state faster than you think. The moment your emotional tone, your interpretation, or your identity shifts, the world around you begins reflecting that change. Sometimes the reflection is subtle, like a sudden sense of ease, or a conversation that opens a door. Sometimes it's unmistakable, like meeting the right person at the exact time you needed guidance, or stumbling across information that answers the question you've been silently carrying. These moments feel magical, not because they break the rules of reality, but because they reveal how reality has been operating all along. When your internal frequency changes, your perception tunes into a different layer of the world. You start noticing things you would have overlooked before. You interpret situations with more clarity. You feel more connected to what's unfolding. This isn't coincidence. It's resonance. The universe isn't sending you signs from the outside. It's showing you who you are on the inside. Synchronicity acts like a feedback mechanism. If your frequency is aligned, synchronicities increase. If your frequency is fragmented or conflicted, the world reflects that through confusion, delays, or mixed signals. It's not punishment or reward, it's information. It's the environment mirroring your internal state so precisely that you can use it as guidance. You've experienced this before during shifts in your life. When you felt clear, certain, or energized, opportunities seemed to cluster together. Plans aligned quickly. People appeared at the right moment. You didn't force those events. They formed around your state. And when you were in a state of doubt or resistance, things that should have been simple suddenly felt difficult. This communication increased. Progress slowed. Again, you weren't being blocked. You were seeing a reflection of your internal alignment. This is why synchronicity is so important. It gives you real-time awareness of whether your state is congruent with the direction you want to go. You don't need to guess. You don't need to wait for a long-term outcome to understand if you're aligned. The world mirrors your frequency quickly enough that you can adjust in the moment. When synchronicities increase, it's not a promise about the future. It's confirmation that you're standing in a version of reality where the things you want are accessible. When synchronicities fade, it's not a setback. It's information telling you to look at your state, your definitions, or your focus. The universe isn't distant or delayed in its responses. It matches your frequency instantly. And the more aware you become of synchronicity as feedback rather than prediction, the more clearly you can navigate the timeline you're in. When you shift into a new parallel reality, the evidence rarely arrives as a dramatic event. It usually appears as small, precise signals that something in your state has already changed. These signals are synchronicities, but not in the vague sense of coincidences. They are structural markers that you've stepped into a different version of the world than the one you occupied moments before. They show up quickly, quietly, and consistently enough that once you learn to recognize them, you can track your timeline shifts in real time. One of the first signs is a change in how things flow. Tasks feel smoother. Delays resolve themselves without effort. Information appears exactly when you need it. You're not forcing movement. It's happening around you. This isn't luck. It's resonance. When you enter a timeline that matches your new state, the external world responds with reduced resistance. Things that once felt heavy or stuck begin moving on their own because you're no longer aligned with the version of reality where friction dominated. Another sign is precision timing. You start meeting the right people at the right moment. You overhear a sentence that answers a question you've been carrying. You stumble onto a resource you weren't actively searching for. These moments feel almost too aligned to be accidental. And that's because they aren't. They're indicators that your perception is locked onto a reality where those connections exist naturally. You may also notice shifts in your emotional tone. Not a wave of excitement or motivation, but a deeper sense of internal alignment. Certain worries lose weight. Old doubts feel less relevant. You don't need to convince yourself to move forward. The movement feels obvious. This internal ease is a sign that the emotional frequency of your new timeline has stabilized enough for your system to feel it. Another subtle indicator is the appearance of symbolic repetition. You see the same numbers, words, or themes echoing throughout your environment. These repetitions aren't messages from outside you. They're reflections of the cognitive and emotional coherence developing within you. Your attention becomes more attuned to patterns that match your internal state, and the outer world seems to echo them because you're perceiving from a different layer of reality. You might also find that certain things from your old timeline begin to fall away. People you resonated with before may drift. Habits that once felt comforting now feel mismatched. Opportunities that used to excite you lose their charge. This isn't regression, it's realignment. Your system is releasing what belongs to the version of you you've stepped out of. The key to interpreting synchronicities as timeline confirmations is to see them as immediate reflections, not predictions. They don't mean something good will eventually happen. They mean something has already shifted. They're the external fingerprints of an internal transition. When they appear, they're showing you that you've already crossed into a new version of reality, and that the next steps are unfolding from the identity you're becoming, not the identity you've left behind. Let me know in the comments what surprising synchronicity you had recently. Others deserve to know so they can be inspired by other people's successes. There are moments when something inside you begins to shift, before anything in your external world changes. You feel a pull, a quiet, steady movement that doesn't come from pressure, urgency, or fear. It's not a push from behind. It's a draw from ahead. It feels like being pulled toward a version of yourself that already exists. A version that feels more aligned, more coherent, and more grounded than the one you've been operating from. This pull is the first indicator that you're moving toward a timeline that matches who you're becoming. It's not emotional intensity. It's not hype. It's a subtle clarity that rises from within. You feel less resistance when thinking about certain actions or choices. You sense that something is right, even before you can explain why. There's a kind of quiet inevitability to it, as if the decision is choosing you as much as you are choosing it. The pull feels like an internal alignment you can't deny. This sensation emerges when your internal state begins to match the frequency of a timeline that's already available. Think of it as resonance. When two frequencies come into coherence, they begin to interact. You feel that interaction as intuition, clarity, openness, or a sudden sense of possibility. It's the first hint that the version of you who lives in that timeline is no longer theoretical. It's becoming accessible. The pull often shows up in small ways first. You may feel lighter when thinking about a certain path. You may feel drawn to take a simple action you've been avoiding. You may notice that old doubts feel less convincing. It's not that everything becomes easy. It's that the internal opposition softens. You're no longer wrestling with your decisions. You're observing them unfold. This pull is your system recognizing alignment before your mind fully understands it. You feel it in your posture, your breathing, the way your thoughts settle. There's a sense that something is organizing itself from the inside out. You're not forcing movement. You're noticing movement that has already started. And because this pull feels natural instead of dramatic, it can be easy to ignore. Most people overlook it because they expect transformation to feel bigger. But the pull toward the future you is almost always quiet. It doesn't push. It invites. It doesn't overwhelm. It steadies. You feel it not as pressure, but as recognition. Something inside you knows you've touched the frequency of a more aligned version of yourself. And that recognition feels like being drawn forward, rather than trying to push past resistance. When you're approaching an aligned timeline, the pull becomes clearer, distractions lose their power, old habits feel less appealing. You begin to sense what matters with more precision. The internal noise fades, and the next step feels closer, even if you can't articulate the entire path. This is not imagination, it's coherence. The future version of you is not ahead in time, it's adjacent in state. And when you begin moving toward that state, the pull you feel is the resonance between your current frequency and the frequency of who you are becoming. This pull is the first sign that alignment is already happening. It's the quiet signal that the new timeline isn't something you're chasing, it's something you're stepping into. There's a moment in every decision where something inside you says, yes. It's quiet, unmistakable, and immediate. You feel it before you can explain it. It shows up as a sensation in your chest, a softening in your body, a slight forward movement in your attention. It's the signal that something is aligned, that the next step is clear, that the timeline you're reaching for is available. And yet, most people override this internal yes almost instantly. The reason is conditioning. From early on, you're taught to prioritize logic over instinct, caution over clarity, and external approval over internal resonance. You're told to be responsible, to think it through, to be realistic. You learn to question your impulses, to distrust what feels right, unless it fits within a familiar framework. The internal yes becomes something you notice but don't follow, because following it feels like stepping outside the structure you've been trained to obey. This conditioning creates hesitation, and hesitation disrupts alignment. When the internal yes arises, it's a signal that your identity and your future are momentarily synchronized. It's the moment where the next timeline is within reach, but the mind steps in with doubt, worry, and unnecessary analysis. It asks for guarantees. It wants certainty. It wants permission from the outside. And because the mind has been given authority for so long, its resistance feels normal. The internal yes becomes drowned out by the reflex of second guessing. Most people think they struggle with clarity. In reality, they struggle with trusting clarity. They feel the signal, but they've been conditioned to treat that signal as suspicious, irresponsible, or naive. The mind argues for the familiar, even when the familiar is no longer aligned. It tells you to wait. It tells you to plan. It tells you to gather more information. And in that pause, the signal fades. The alignment weakens. The opportunity that was alive in the moment loses its sharpness. But the internal yes is not impulsive. It's not reckless. It's the body's recognition of resonance. It's your system picking up on subtle coherence before the mind catches up. The mind works with concepts. The body works with truth. The body feels alignment before the mind understands it. When that yes arises, it's because the path ahead is already open. The timeline is already accessible. Ignoring it doesn't protect you. It keeps you anchored in a version of yourself you've outgrown. Once you begin noticing this yes, you start to see how often you've overridden it. You'll realize there were choices you knew were right the moment they appeared, but doubt made you delay. You'll recognize moments when something felt aligned instantly, but you convinced yourself to wait for a better time, that waiting wasn't wisdom. It was conditioning, and every time you ignored the yes, you reinforced the belief that your inner guidance couldn't be trusted. The internal yes is the closest thing you have to a compass. When it appears, it's not predicting the future. It's showing you the present alignment that connects you to the future you want. And the more you honor it, the more natural it becomes to move toward timelines that match who you truly are. Most people misunderstand excitement. They think it's adrenaline, enthusiasm, or emotional intensity. They imagine it as loud, dramatic, or highly stimulated. But highest excitement is none of that. It's not hype. It's not thrill-seeking. It's not a rush of energy. Highest excitement is coherence. It's resonance. It's the internal signal that tells you which action, idea, or direction is most aligned with who you are right now. Excitement is the feeling of your system recognizing a match between your current state and a timeline available to you. It's the emotional indicator of a state of alignment, not the cause of alignment. When something carries the highest excitement, it means that action sits at the point of strongest resonance between your internal frequency and the version of reality that wants to unfold next. It's your navigation system showing you the next available doorway. True excitement is subtle. It can show up as a calm clarity, a steady interest, a sense of openness in your chest, or a gentle forward pull. It can be quiet rather than loud. It does not need to feel dramatic to be real. What matters is the sense of internal coherence, the feeling that something fits, that it aligns, that it belongs to the version of you you're stepping into. This feeling is the physical and emotional reflection of an energetic match. The body plays a major role in recognizing this. When something carries the highest excitement, your body softens rather than tenses. Your breathing becomes easier. Your attention focuses naturally. You don't need to force motivation, because the action already fits the direction your system is organizing toward. The coherence is felt before it's understood. This signal is precise. It's not random inspiration or fleeting desire. It's a moment-to-moment indicator of which action will keep you aligned with your highest available timeline. Excitement points to the path of least resistance, not because it avoids challenge, but because it leads you through growth that matches your natural momentum. You are not choosing excitement. You are recognizing it. It's not something you create. It's something you notice. Highest excitement also contains a sense of rightness that doesn't depend on outcome. You feel pulled towards something, even if you can't predict where it leads. That's because the alignment comes from the action itself, not the result. The feeling is the confirmation. When you follow it, you're aligning with the version of yourself that is most coherent in this moment. When you ignore it, you remain in a version of yourself that is out of sync with where your system wants to go. Understanding highest excitement as coherence changes everything. It removes the pressure to chase big emotional highs. It removes the confusion about what direction to take. It replaces effort with clarity. The signal is always present, but most people overlook it because they expect it to feel bigger or louder. In reality, the most aligned action is often the one that feels naturally interesting, clear, or quietly compelling. Highest excitement is not entertainment, it's guidance. It's the precise, moment-by-moment signal that shows you the path where your internal frequency and your highest available timeline already match. Acting on your highest excitement begins with something simple. Identify the action in front of you that carries the strongest sense of alignment right now, and move toward it without insisting on where it must lead. This isn't about choosing the biggest or most impressive action. It's about recognizing the direction that contains the clearest resonance in this moment, and letting that resonance guide your next step. The power of this technique lies in its immediacy. It shifts your state now, and because timelines respond to state, it shifts your reality now. The mind often wants to complicate this. It wants a full plan, a clear outcome, and a guarantee. But excitement doesn't operate through prediction. It operates through alignment. The action that carries the highest excitement is the one that places you in the frequency that matches your next timeline. You don't need to know how it will unfold. You only need to recognize that it feels coherent, alive, or simply more aligned than the alternatives. This technique works because excitement points to the path with the least resistance between who you are and who you are becoming. When you take an action that holds resonance, your state shifts immediately. Your posture, your attention, your emotional field all move into coherence. And because state selects timelines, this internal shift pulls you into a version of reality where the next aligned step already exists. Acting on excitement isn't about chasing an emotion. It's about stepping into the identity that matches the timeline you want to inhabit. Zero insistence on the outcome is essential. The moment you attach a specific expectation to the action, you collapse your frequency back into your old identity. The version of you that tries to control reality rather than align with it. Insistence introduces tension. It creates contraction. It shifts your state away from coherence, breaking the alignment the excitement created. That's why the technique requires movement without pressure. You let the action be complete in itself. The excitement is the indicator, not the outcome. When you act without insisting, something else happens. Your system becomes available to receive the next step. Excitement works like a chain. One aligned action reveals the next. But you can only perceive that next action when you're not fixated on forcing a specific result. The more open you are, the clearer the next link becomes. Some actions will lead to opportunities. Others will simply shift your state. Both are equally valid. The purpose is alignment, not prediction. This technique doesn't require dramatic choices. It often begins with small, simple actions. Send a message, reorganize a space, research an idea, take a walk, pick up a project you've been avoiding. What matters is not the scale of the action, but the resonance behind it. When you follow even the smallest signal, you move into a timeline where the next aligned action can appear. And with each step, your reality adjusts to match the identity that is taking these actions. Acting on the highest excitement available now is not about chasing intensity. It's about following coherence. It's about becoming the version of yourself who no longer delays alignment. And the moment you act from that place, the shift is immediate. Your state changes, your timeline changes, and the path ahead begins to reveal itself without force. One of the most powerful aspects of acting on your highest excitement is that the path never needs to be fully visible. You're not meant to see the entire timeline at once. You're meant to see the next link in the chain, and that link only appears after you take the step that comes before it. Excitement works sequentially. Each action taken from alignment opens a doorway to the next aligned action, and together they form an organic path that leads you into a new timeline. This chain doesn't unfold through planning or prediction. It unfolds through resonance. When you act on the highest excitement available in the moment, your state shifts into greater coherence. That shift places you in a version of reality where new options become visible. Options you couldn't have perceived from your previous state. The next step doesn't come from thinking ahead. It comes from entering the timeline where the next step already exists. This is why excitement often points to actions that seem small or unrelated. You might feel drawn to send a message, reorganize a part of your environment, begin a task you've postponed, or explore something out of simple curiosity. These actions may not look significant from the outside, but they carry resonance. And that resonance is the key. Taking the step that aligns with that resonance moves you into a state where the next aligned step becomes available. The chain builds itself. One step leads to another without force. Sometimes the next action appears immediately while you're still in motion. Other times it appears hours or days later, triggered by the clarity your previous action created. You don't manufacture these moments, you recognize them. The signal is never vague. It shows up as interest, clarity, or a feeling that a certain direction simply belongs to you right now. When you follow this chain consistently, something deeper happens. You begin to notice that the steps fit together in ways you couldn't have planned. You see connections you wouldn't have predicted. You find yourself meeting people, discovering opportunities, and entering environments that align with your trajectory. It doesn't feel random. It feels coordinated, even though nothing was forced. The timeline is building itself around your alignment. This process bypasses the limitations of linear planning. When you try to plan your way into a new reality, your plan is based on your current identity. It reflects what you think is possible, not what is actually available. The chain of excitement bypasses those limitations by guiding you through actions that match the identity you're becoming, rather than the one you're leaving behind. Following this chain also prevents stagnation. When you rely on motivation or discipline, you can freeze when conditions don't match your expectations. But excitement-based actions are always available. There is always something that carries more resonance than the rest, no matter how small. And because each step shifts your state, the chain continues even when you can't see far ahead. The timeline you step into is built moment by moment. Each excitement-based action is a beam placed into the structure of your future. When you follow the chain, you don't force the structure to appear. You build it through coherence. You let the next step reveal itself naturally. And in doing so, you walk into a future that matches your highest state, one aligned action at a time. Your body often senses alignment long before your mind can explain it. The mind works with concepts, logic, and prediction, but the body works with direct experience. It reacts to coherence immediately. It picks up on resonance the moment it appears. And because of that, your body becomes the first indicator that you are stepping into a timeline that matches who you're becoming. One of the clearest signals is expansion. When something is aligned, your chest feels more open. Your breath deepens without effort. Your shoulders release. There's more space inside your body, as if tension you didn't realize you were holding begins to unwind. This expansion isn't dramatic. It's subtle, steady, and unmistakable once you learn to recognize it. It's your system's way of saying, this direction fits. This is where your energy moves naturally. Another signal is spaciousness. When you consider an aligned action or possibility, your mind becomes quieter. There's less internal noise. Thoughts don't compete or clash. Instead, they settle. The internal environment feels clearer, almost like you've stepped into a room with more light and fewer obstacles. Spaciousness shows up as an absence of friction. It's the feeling that nothing inside you is arguing with the direction you're sensing. Somatic ease is another powerful indicator. Ease doesn't mean the action will be effortless or that it won't involve growth. It means that your system isn't resisting it. Your breath moves evenly. Your stomach softens. Your jaw relaxes. Your posture shifts from guarded to receptive. This ease is not emotional excitement. It's physical coherence. It's the body recognizing alignment before your thoughts try to analyze it. These sensations appear before the mind forms a clear explanation. The body feels the alignment first because it isn't filtering the experience through past conditioning, fear, or assumptions. It's responding to resonance in real time. The mind often lags behind, trying to interpret the sensation, fit it into a narrative, or make sense of it logically. But if you wait for mental certainty before trusting your body's signal, you delay the shift that's already available. Most people have learned to ignore these signals. Cultural conditioning teaches you to trust analysis over intuition, tension over openness, fear over clarity. But the body's signals have always been accurate indicators of alignment. When you think about a misaligned direction, your body contracts, your breath shortens, your attention scatters. When you think about an aligned direction, your body opens. These patterns are consistent, reliable, and immediate. Recognizing these signals helps you navigate timelines with far more precision. When expansion, spaciousness, or ease appear, it means your internal state is matching a path that's available to you right now. The alignment is already in motion. You don't need to force clarity or push yourself into action. You only need to acknowledge the signal and let it guide you. Your body is not separate from your intuition. It is the physical expression of alignment. It responds to coherence faster than the mind can process it. And when you learn to trust these signals, you gain access to a form of guidance that is subtle, steady, and always accurate. The body knows before you do, not because it's wiser than the mind, but because it feels resonance without hesitation. Anxiety and excitement feel like opposites, but in the body they are almost identical. Both states activate the same physiological responses: increased energy, sharper focus, heightened awareness, and a surge of sensation in the chest or stomach. The body doesn't label these sensations. It doesn't call them good or bad. It simply responds to an increase in internal energy. The difference comes from interpretation. The mind names one sensation danger and the other alignment, even though the body is doing the same thing in both cases. This misunderstanding causes people to misread their own guidance. Many of the sensations that signal alignment, elevated energy, quickened breath, a buzzing in the chest, are the same sensations they've learned to associate with fear. Because of that conditioning, excitement often gets mislabeled as anxiety. The internal yes gets mistaken for a warning sign. And the very energy that could move someone toward an aligned timeline becomes the reason they hesitate or avoid the next step. Understanding this overlap changes everything. Instead of treating physical arousal as a sign of danger, you begin to look at the context. You ask what the sensation is responding to. You notice whether the thought behind it is expansive or contracting. If you consider a possibility, and your body activates with energy but not with contraction. You're likely feeling excitement. The energy is forward moving. Your system is preparing for alignment. But if the energy comes with a sense of shrinking, tightening, or pulling away, that's anxiety. The direction feels mismatched, and your body is signaling caution. Most people never learn to separate arousal from danger. Growing up, any intense sensation in the body was often interpreted as something to avoid. But intensity doesn't mean threat. It means potential. The body increases energy whenever you approach something meaningful, unfamiliar, or aligned with growth. Excitement is not calm. It's active. It elevates your system because you're stepping into a timeline that carries momentum. Reinterpreting these sensations doesn't require suppressing fear or forcing confidence. It requires noticing what the sensation points toward. Does the thought of taking this action create a sense of possibility, curiosity, or expansion, even if the body feels activated? That's excitement. Does the thought create a desire to retreat, hide, or shrink? That's anxiety. The sensations themselves are not the signal. The direction they pull you toward is. When you begin to understand this, the body becomes easier to read. The moments you once labeled as anxiety start to reveal themselves as indicators that you're close to something aligned. The energy you used to resist becomes the momentum you learn to follow. Instead of backing away from intense sensations, you examine them with precision. You notice whether they come with openness or contraction. This shift in interpretation prevents you from abandoning aligned timelines simply because the body is awake. It helps you respond to your internal signals with clarity instead of fear. The energy you feel is not the enemy. It's information. It's your system telling you that you're approaching a moment of resonance or mismatch. And when you learn to distinguish the two, you gain the ability to move through heightened states with confidence rather than hesitation. Anxiety and excitement will continue to feel similar in the body. That won't change. What changes is your understanding. And with the right interpretation, the same energy that once held you back becomes the energy that moves you forward. In the modern world, it's easy to believe that learning is progress. You read, you watch, you listen, you absorb. You gather concepts, insights, and techniques. You feel inspired for a moment, maybe even transformed. But without action, knowledge doesn't shift your timeline. It only reinforces the version of you that waits. This is the universal trap. Consuming more information while staying in the same state. The mind feels productive, but your reality doesn't move. People accumulate ideas endlessly. Ideas about manifestation, identity, energy, discipline, purpose. They understand the theory. They can explain the principles. They can repeat the concepts with clarity. But understanding is not embodiment. And embodiment is what changes the trajectory of your life. Embodiment is what collapses timelines. Without action, knowledge stays in the realm of possibility, instead of becoming part of your lived experience. The reason this trap is so common is that learning feels safe. It gives you a sense of progress without requiring you to step into uncertainty. You can stay in motion without actually moving. You can convince yourself you're evolving simply because you're collecting insights. But insights don't shift frequency. They don't alter identity. They don't change your emotional baseline. They don't move you into a new reality. Only lived alignment does. Avoiding action often comes from the fear of making the wrong move, the fear of being seen, or the fear of leaving behind the identity you've been maintaining for years. The mind tries to postpone movement until it feels perfectly ready, forgetting that readiness is something that develops through action, not before it. You can't think your way into the version of yourself you want to become. You have to behave your way into that identity, one step at a time, one moment of alignment at a time. Every meaningful shift in your life has come from action, not information. There was a moment when you decided, when you moved, when you said yes to something, without knowing where it would lead. Those moments changed you, because they required you to operate from a different state than the one you were used to. The action wasn't the final answer. It was the doorway. It was the signal to your system that you were no longer repeating the past. When you stay in a cycle of learning without applying, your reality remains tied to your old state. You may feel inspired, but you stay familiar. You may feel insightful, but nothing in your environment changes. This creates the illusion that change is slow or difficult, when the real issue is that the transformation never moved from mind to body. Embodiment means taking what resonates and expressing it through action, behavior, and lived experience. It means letting your identity adjust through movement, instead of waiting for a perfect wave of motivation. The moment you apply what you know, even in a small way, you shift your frequency. And when your frequency shifts, the timeline you're standing in changes with it. Most people will continue to gather information endlessly, hoping knowledge alone will change their lives. But knowledge changes nothing until you act on it, and when you do, even the smallest step becomes the beginning of a new reality. A single aligned action can do more for your future than months of planning. People often imagine that transformation requires a dramatic leap or a major breakthrough. But the truth is that every major shift begins with a micro step. One small movement, taken from a coherent state, carries enough resonance to flip your trajectory into an entirely different probability field. The scale of the action doesn't determine its impact. The alignment does. A micro-step is the smallest action that carries the feeling of clarity or resonance. It might be making a call, writing a sentence, reorganizing a space, sending an email, researching something you've been avoiding, or simply choosing a different behavior than the one your old identity would repeat. The action itself can look insignificant from the outside, but internally, it represents a shift in identity. It is the moment you behave as the version of yourself you've been trying to become, rather than the version you've been maintaining. When you take a micro step from alignment, your state changes instantly. Your nervous system, your focus, and your perception reorganize around the new identity you're expressing. Because your state has shifted, the timeline you're standing in shifts with it. The future that was available to your old identity fades, and a new set of probabilities emerges. These probabilities were always there, but they only become accessible once your frequency matches them. This is why even a small action can create a disproportionate effect. The action is not powerful because of its size. It's powerful because it signals to your system that you're no longer operating from hesitation, avoidance, or past conditioning. You're acting from coherence. And coherence collapses timelines quickly. When you take an aligned microstep, synchronicities often appear soon after. The next piece of information arrives. The right person reaches out. A new option reveals itself that you couldn't have predicted. These moments aren't random. They are the early reflections of your new state. They show that your action has activated a different probability field. One small step made the future reorganize around you. The reason microsteps work so effectively is that they bypass overwhelm. The mind becomes paralyzed when it tries to solve everything at once, but it relaxes when the next step is small and clear. Alignment doesn't ask you to transform your life in a single moment. It asks you to take the smallest action that carries resonance, trusting that this action will lead you to the next. Every probability field contains its own chain of opportunities, and stepping into that field requires only the first movement. People underestimate micro steps because they expect change to feel dramatic. But the most powerful shifts usually feel simple. There's no surge of adrenaline, no grand revelation, just a quiet sense that you're doing the next right thing. That quietness is exactly what makes the step effective. It comes from coherence, not desperation. A micro step taken from alignment is the moment your future flips. It's the hinge that turns possibility into reality. And when you act from that place, you don't just move toward a new timeline, you enter it. After you take an aligned action, something subtle but powerful begins to unfold. Reality starts to reorganize around the version of you who took that step. This shift doesn't require force, persuasion, or control. It happens naturally because your state has changed, and reality mirrors state with precision. The moment you behave as the version of yourself you're becoming, the world responds as if that version is already here. This reconfiguration isn't dramatic at first. It often begins with small adjustments, people responding differently, opportunities appearing that weren't visible before, or tasks you once resisted suddenly feeling easier. These changes aren't coincidences. They are the early signs that your environment is recalibrating to match your new frequency. When your internal alignment stabilizes, your external world begins to reflect that stability. Reality doesn't shift all at once. It reorganizes through sequences. The relationships, resources, and circumstances that resonate with your new state begin to draw closer, while the ones aligned with your old identity naturally fall away. You don't have to push them out. You don't have to control anything. You simply allow the rearrangement to occur. Alignment does the organizing for you. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of transformation. People believe they must manually reshape their environment, cut things out, force new habits, restructure everything at once. But when your identity shifts through aligned action, many of those changes unfold without deliberate effort. The old patterns lose their grip because they no longer have resonance. The new patterns strengthen because your state supports them. The reconfiguration is organic. You may notice that conversations change. People who once drained your energy begin to fade from your orbit. Others who support your new direction become more present. You might find yourself drawn to different environments, routines, or creative impulses. None of this needs to be pushed. Your system is simply reorganizing around the new identity you've activated. What's important is that you don't interfere by trying to control the outcome. The mind often wants to micromanage the unfolding, to predict exactly how things should rearrange. But control comes from fear, and fear disrupts alignment. When you act from excitement and immediately try to determine where that action must lead, you pull yourself out of the state that created the shift. Letting reality reorganize means trusting that the next step will appear naturally, just as the first one did. This reconfiguration also includes internal adjustments. Old doubts may resurface briefly, not to sabotage you, but to be released because your new timeline has no place for them. Emotional patterns that once felt heavy may loosen. Your body may feel lighter, your thoughts clearer. These shifts signal integration. You're stabilizing in the new frequency, and your environment is responding accordingly. Letting reality reconfigure around you is not passive. It's receptive. It's the willingness to stay aligned without forcing outcomes. When you allow this process, you create the conditions for synchronicities to accelerate, for clarity to deepen, and for opportunities to align with remarkable precision. The moment you take an aligned action, you set a new trajectory in motion. The environment begins to adjust, not because you pushed it, but because you changed the state from which your life emerges. Letting reality reconfigure means trusting that your new frequency is already shaping the world you are stepping into. Identity momentum begins the moment you act from alignment more than once. A single aligned action shifts your state, but repeated aligned actions form a pattern. That pattern becomes a tendency, and that tendency becomes identity. This is how you evolve into the version of yourself who naturally follows excitement, without overthinking, without hesitation, and without needing constant reassurance. You become someone for whom alignment isn't an exception, it's the default. The first few aligned actions often require awareness. You notice the pull. You recognize the signal. You choose to trust it. But as you repeat this process, something begins to change inside you. The parts of you that used to resist start losing strength. The doubts that once felt heavy lose their authority. The hesitation that used to slow you down fades because your system becomes familiar with alignment. What once felt like a leap begins to feel like the most natural step. Identity momentum forms when your nervous system begins associating excitement with safety rather than danger. At first, excitement can feel unfamiliar, even risky. Your old identity interprets the surge of energy as something to be careful with. But each time you move toward resonance instead of away from it, your system rewrites that interpretation. Excitement becomes the signal to move, not to retreat. This subtle rewiring is what stabilizes the new identity. As momentum builds, you stop needing guarantees from the future before you act. You stop trying to predict the path before stepping onto it. You no longer wait for perfect clarity, because you trust that clarity appears after movement, not before. Your identity becomes oriented toward what feels coherent, rather than what feels certain. This shift reduces overthinking naturally. You no longer need to push yourself out of old patterns. They simply stop calling to you. Another sign of identity momentum is that aligned actions become smaller and more frequent. You don't wait for big decisions. You move with the micro signals, the nudge to start something, the impulse to explore, the sense that a particular step belongs to you right now. These micro actions accumulate. They create a rhythm, and that rhythm becomes a new way of being. You start to navigate your life by resonance rather than obligation. Momentum also influences your emotional baseline. Instead of oscillating between clarity and doubt, you feel a steadier sense of openness. You recover faster from uncertainty. You shift states more easily. The space between inspiration and action becomes shorter, because the identity that hesitates is no longer the one operating. You've stepped into a version of yourself that moves. Over time, following excitement doesn't feel like a practice. It feels like instinct. You don't need to remind yourself to trust the signal. You don't need to convince yourself that alignment works. Your lived experience has shown you. The feedback loop becomes self-reinforcing. Aligned actions lead to aligned outcomes, which strengthen the identity that chooses aligned actions again. Identity momentum is not about intensity, it's about consistency. It's the accumulation of small, coherent decisions that reshape who you are and what you believe about yourself. When excitement becomes your default navigation system, your timeline accelerates. You no longer chase the future. You embody the version of yourself who naturally moves toward it. Living from the timeline you chose begins when alignment stops feeling like something you do and becomes the way you exist. At this point, the identity shift is no longer a practice. It's no longer a technique you remind yourself to apply. It's the foundation you stand on. You move through your day with a quiet consistency, because the version of you who hesitated, overanalyzed, or doubted has been replaced by the version who acts from coherence naturally. This is not effort. It's integration. When the identity shift is complete, your decisions feel simpler. You don't wrestle with choices because the aligned option is obvious. It stands out as the one that feels clean, grounded, and steady. There's no need for dramatic intuition or emotional intensity. Alignment feels calm. It feels stable. You're not scanning for signs or asking whether you're on the right path. You feel yourself on the path because your internal state matches it without strain. Living from the chosen timeline also means you no longer see your future as something ahead of you. You feel it as something you're expressing right now. Your actions, your posture, your attention, and your emotional tone already reflect the version of yourself you committed to becoming. There's no gap to close. You're not trying to reach anything. You're maintaining the frequency that naturally generates the life you're experiencing. In this state, synchronicities become normal. They don't surprise you because they match your internal coherence. Flow becomes ordinary, not exceptional. The world responds quickly because you're not sending contradictory signals. You're broadcasting one clear frequency, and reality mirrors it with precision. This isn't magical thinking. It's the result of internal alignment, stabilizing to the point where the external world adjusts without resistance. Maintaining this alignment doesn't require constant monitoring. It requires honesty. When something feels off, you don't ignore it. You adjust your state before forcing action. You return to coherence first, knowing that action taken from misalignment only reinforces the timelines you've left behind. This makes your movements more efficient. You do less, but everything you do carries more impact because it comes from the right version of you. Living from the chosen timeline also means you stop negotiating with your old identity. You no longer revisit old stories or rehearse old limitations. The past loses its authority because it no longer matches your state. You don't need to correct yourself or fight old patterns. They simply dissolve from lack of reinforcement. You've stepped into a frequency where those patterns cannot survive. The feeling of being pulled into your future becomes a steady orientation rather than a momentary signal. You move with a sense of inevitability, not because you're forcing anything, but because the alignment is consistent. You've replaced effort with presence. You've replaced doubt with clarity. And the world you're living in reflects that shift in thousands of subtle ways. Living from the timeline you chose is the point where transformation stops being something you pursue. It becomes something you express. Your life stops being a reaction to old definitions and becomes a reflection of your highest coherence. And from that place, the future isn't something you chase. It's the natural consequence of who you've become. If you resonated with this video, give it a thumbs up and see you tomorrow. It's easy to imagine life as a single continuous timeline, something you move through like a straight path. But what's actually happening is much more dynamic. Your reality refreshes constantly, frame by frame, like an endless sequence of snapshots. And with every shift in your state, every change in your mood, your focus, your belief, you step into a slightly different version of the world. This isn't metaphor. It's how perception, interpretation, and identity create the experience you call your life. You shift realities far more often than you realize. The small changes you feel throughout the day, The shifts in clarity, the changes in perspective, even the moments when something suddenly clicks. These are all signs that your state has moved, and the reality you're interfacing with has moved along with it. You don't notice the shifts because the mind stitches them together into one seamless story. But underneath that narrative, your consciousness is selecting version after version of the world based on the frequency you broadcast in that moment. This is why your day can feel completely different, depending on how you wake up. One morning, everything feels smooth and predictable. Another morning, the same environment feels heavy or chaotic. The external world didn't fundamentally change overnight. The version of you that met the day did. And with that internal shift, the world you interacted with shifted as well. You crossed into a different expression of what was always available. Most people assume their mood changes because of circumstances. But the opposite is often true. Circumstances adjust because of the internal state you bring to them. When your emotional frequency changes, your perception changes. When your perception changes, your choices change. When your choices change, your trajectory changes. With enough subtle shifts, you find yourself living in a reality that feels noticeably different from the one you woke up in just hours earlier. These shifts happen unconsciously all the time. Every reaction, every moment of focus, every thought pattern alters your internal state. And each internal state aligns with a slightly different version of reality. This is why small internal shifts can create meaningful external changes without you realizing how it happened. You simply moved into a reality where those outcomes were more likely. Seeing this clearly removes the mystery from big transformations. If you can shift timelines unconsciously through everyday emotion and attention, imagine what becomes possible when you do it consciously. Imagine what happens when the state you choose aligns with the version of you you've been trying to reach for years. It doesn't require a dramatic event. It requires recognizing that shifting realities isn't unusual or rare. It's happening right now. It's happening constantly, and you're already good at it. Most people never notice because they're taught to attribute every change to time, effort, or circumstance. But the deeper mechanism has always been state-based. Reality responds to who you are in the moment. And the moment you understand that you've been shifting all along, the idea of choosing your direction becomes far more natural. You're not learning something new. You're becoming aware of a process that has been guiding your life from the beginning. You can want something with your mind and still never reach it. You can set goals, visualize outcomes, write affirmations, and plan your future. Yet find yourself repeating the same patterns year after year. The reason isn't lack of effort or intelligence. It's that goals alone don't shift timelines. Desire doesn't shift timelines. Intention doesn't shift timelines. Only your state does. State is the combination of your emotional frequency, your internal definitions, and the way your body holds those definitions. It's the felt sense you carry right now. And that state is what determines which version of reality becomes available to you. When your state changes, your options change. When your options change, your timeline changes. But when your state stays the same, even strong goals can't move you out of the version of life you're already inhabiting. Most people try to reach new outcomes while staying in the emotional state of their old identity. They set a bold goal, but keep the frequency of uncertainty, lack, or self-doubt. They try to manifest abundance while feeling scarcity. They pursue new relationships while maintaining a frequency shaped by old wounds. They want change without shifting the emotional foundation that selects the timeline where that change exists. And because the state doesn't move, the reality doesn't either. It's not enough to think about a better future. You have to become the version of yourself who lives in that future. That shift is internal, long before it becomes external. When the emotional frequency matches the outcome, the reality that corresponds to that frequency becomes reachable. But when the frequency contradicts the desire stays theoretical. You've experienced this before without realizing it. Think of a day when you felt clear, grounded, and open. On that day, opportunities seemed closer. Solutions felt obvious. Conversations flowed. Small things worked in your favor. The external world didn't suddenly reorganize itself. You stepped into a timeline that matched your internal clarity. The opposite is also true. When you've been in a state of frustration or fear, even simple tasks felt harder. Options seemed limited. The world felt heavier. You weren't in the same timeline, even if everything looked familiar. Timelines respond to state. State responds to identity. And identity responds to the beliefs you hold in the background. This means you can change your trajectory not by forcing outcomes, but by shifting the internal frequency that selects them. When the state aligns with the version of you who already has the experience you want, the goal stops being a pursuit and becomes an expression of who you are. This understanding releases the pressure to chase results. You stop trying to make timelines bend to your will. Instead, you step into the emotional tone that naturally brings you into alignment with the timeline where those results already exist. State leads, reality follows. And the moment your state matches the life you've been reaching for, the path to that life appears without force or struggle.